Supply Lines of the American Revolution. This is not the catchiest title out there. It's very descriptive. It almost feels like in other war games this would be the subtitle. First you would have a little more attractive title and then a subtitle that tells you what the game is about. Haha, they are not wasting time here. There's a game about the American Revolution, and it is a game with a very prominent element of logistics. You have to supply your armies. So many war games are about heroic leadership. You think of yourself from the point of view of the commander, bird eye view, this sort of like Olympian view of the battlefield. Here you have a much humbler job, but one that is equally crucial, which is make sure that you supply your armies, because just having the good intentions but not to have the food and the ammo to march your soldiers or to start a battle is gonna be a problem. So it is an interesting element, an interesting combination of elements here. There aren't many war games that emphasize logistics. In most cases, logistics is abstract. Maybe at the end of the turn you have, well, check your supply lines. But games where physically, the logistical element is represented physically by game pieces that represent supplies that you have to physically move, not many out there. And when you look at the game and you start playing it, you will almost have the impression that this is a hybrid between a war game and a Euro game. Not in my opinion. After playing the game, I can tell you that, in my opinion, this is a war game. This is a true war game, precisely because the logistical element, the economic, the practical, the material element is just ingrained in the military element so deeply that it feels like it is a war game that also has that element, rather than a war game that elements from somewhere else. Anyway, let's take a closer look at Supply Lines of the American Revolution. Let's start by having a look at the map. The map is printed on cardstock. It is thick enough, it lays flat nicely enough. I didn't use a piece of plexiglass when I was playing the game. It looks really nice to me, simple, yes, but again, nice looking, pleasant, and very readable. There are various types of location on the map. As you can see, this is a point-to-point map. We have cities, very important cities. They generate supplies, and you can also use them to store supplies. The box on the left is where you place combat units. The box on the right is where you place supplies. As you can see, some cities also have a crown because they represent victory areas. We have forts that can hold supplies, but they do not generate them. And then we have points. Points are those small boxes there. Armies can stay there, can move there. And boxes represent areas of farmland that surround the cities. At an abstract level, they generate the supplies that will show up in the city, which is why for a city to generate supplies, you need to have an army in there, and then you need to have access to at least one point, one adjacent point area not occupied by enemy units. Which means, as you can see here, that by taking control of that box, you're basically besieging Boston, as you're blocking the arrival of supplies in Boston. Then also we have some ports that the Crown player, the British player, can use, and a C box and a Nova Scotia box, which again belong, quote-unquote, belong to the British player, can be used only by the British player. They represent naval superiority, and they're used, the C box, to move units around and to move supplies around, and Nova Scotia to generate supplies that then are used in the battle. Some of the tracks that we have in the game, we have the game turn track. Some turns will be winter turns. Very tough for the American player because during winter turns the army disbands, as it historically happened. We have the Patriot support track. During the game, several effects will cause that marker to move up the track towards the Treaty of Alliance or away from it. Say, for example, if the British player burns down a city, that will rally support for the Americans, that will increase their morale, and then the marker will go up. Winning a battle, depending on the side that wins it, also makes that move in one direction or the other. If the marker reaches the Treaty of Alliance box, then the American player wins the game. The pass track, very interesting. At the beginning of each turn, both players roll a 6-sided die to determine who has initiative. The highest roll goes first, and then you mark there the number of the highest rolls. Suppose a 4 and a 1 were rolled, then the player that rolled the 4 goes first. You place the pass marker there under the 4 number. Then during the game, during the main turn, players will alternate taking turns. In your turn, you can activate one of your armies, or you can pass. Each time that a player passes, the marker is moved down by 1 box. And a turn is over when both players pass in a row, or when the pass marker reaches that area, reaches the 0 box. Finally, another important track that we have is the Crown Reinforcement track. The British player can request reinforcements from the other side of the pond. In order to do so, the player removes one of these markers, starting from the 1 marker. The player receives that number of units. Also, this is placed in Nova Scotia and represents extra supplies that will be received each turn. However, the more reinforcements you ask for as the British player, the higher the expectations for victory in the Parliament at home, and that is also why, as you request new reinforcements, the number of victory cities that you need to control is higher. The number of victory cities you need to control in order to win the game. There are several victory conditions. They are meant to represent a lot of possible outcomes. As you've seen, for example, the American player wins by reaching a Treaty of Alliance. There are other conditions, but in general, we can say that victory is based on control of victory areas and on affecting the political scenario by winning battles and, or for the American player, by delaying the end of the war for long enough. Players control 2 types of combat units: leaders, represented by those nice hats, and combat units proper. As you can see, they have numbers on them, and you can make change freely. A 2 unit can always be broken down into 2, 1 unit, a 4 into, well, anything you want as long as it adds up to 4 at the end. This is very important because during the game you will want to create supply lines to move supplies around. There are 2 types of supplies. The green supplies are food, and that is used to move armies, and then the natural wood supplies represent war supplies, and those are used in combat. During the game, you will be able to move supplies freely along lines of supplies, and those are represented by areas that are adjacent to one another and contain your armies, so I can move things freely here. Of course, the longer you stretch your supply lines, the thinner they become and the harder they become to defend. But again, supplies are very important because unless you're spending supplies, there isn't pretty much anything that you can do. Once you determine who has initiative, players alternate playing impulses, which pretty much means player turns. And during a player turn, you can pass or activate a location to perform an action with the units that are there. A common action is to move, is to march, and in order to do so, again, you need to activate an area and spend food. You spend a point of food, a cube of food, for each 4 units, 4 points of combat units that you're activating in an area. Interesting enough, if you have more than what you want to activate, usually you will still need to spend enough to feed everybody in there. Suppose that this is my situation, I want to move only 4 of those units, but 6 are there, then I'm still spending 2 cubes instead of just 1. Unless you have a leader, then leaders make expenditure more efficient, then you're pretty much only spending food for the units that you are actually activating and moving. And suppose I do that. And this is for marching. Spend food units to move spend food supplies to move an army, or just say a group of combat units, to an adjacent box through land connections. The English player also has other options for movement. For example, from a port, the English player can move units to the C box, or can move units from the C box to a port. Also, another type of unit of movement is, of course, when you're moving to an area that contains enemy units, and this time you do that to fight. Also, when you do so, you may want to carry war supplies with you, because without war supplies, you may get there, show up, say hi, but you can't fire, you can't actually attack or defend. A similar option is when, but it's only open to the American units, is when you move a unit, you move a small army into an area that contains enemy units in a point, and then you're launching a smaller battle, which is a one-sided battle. Pretty much is a hit and run. You go there, you attack, and then you run away without having to suffer the consequences. As opposed to a battle, which takes place among larger formations and can also be started by the British player. A battle is a more involved process. Actually, yeah, let's take a look at that battle. First, the defender decides if the defender wants to actually participate in the battle or not. It takes 2 to tango and 2 to fight a battle. The defender can choose to retreat, which is particularly important during in this conflict in which, in fact, the American armies are often trying to avoid confrontation. So if the defender decides to accept battle, not to retreat, then the attacker commits cube to roll dice. Usually it would take, when you attack a point, 1 cube per die. When you're attacking a city or a fort, the defenses of the defender, the advantageous position, means that you need 2 war cubes to generate a single combat dice. So you need to bring a lot of stuff with you if you want to launch an effective attack. Suppose that here these have been brought along by the English player, and now the English player has generated 2 dice in attack. The defender also decides if he or she wants to actually commit dice to defend. You may just sit there and hope that the stuff that is not too bad happens, or you may decide to fire. The defender decides to spend cubes to generate combat dice, then the defender gets to roll them first. The defender rolls their defensive dice, if they decided to generate any by spending war supplies. For each 1 or 2 that the defender rolls, a unit of the opponent is eliminated. For each 2 units of the attacker that are eliminated during the defense phase, 1 combat die of the attacker is removed. After that possible defensive fire, as you can see, it can be pretty devastating, but you need to have the resources to actually pull it off. So if defensive fire takes place, after that is resolved, the attacker finally gets to attack and to roll the attack dice that they may still have. And yes, you cannot start a battle if you cannot generate at least an attack die. The attacker rolls dice, and if the attacker is the Americans, then the attacker scores a hit and removes an enemy unit for each 1 or 2 that is rolled. The British in attack are tougher, and actually, so if they get to attack, they score a hit against the opponent for each 1, 2, or 3 that they roll on an attack die. After that is determined and hits are applied. The side that has the most units in there, including also leaders, who wins the battle. And if that is the defender, then the attacker simply retreats where they came from. Otherwise, if it is the attacker that won the battle, the defender rolls morale. There is a morale check that needs to be taken. And if the morale check is passed, the attacker still has to retreat. So in a certain sense, it's very easy to retreat from battle. You can leave the battlefield easily. I would say the defender will move away very often before a battle, but if the defender decides to take a stance, it's very hard to dislodge a defender, because you need to go through the defenses and to win a battle, and the defender has to lose the morale test. There are a couple of other options. Again, the skirmish is similar, but it's a one-sided battle. Only the American gets to roll dice. But again, that only takes place in points. And with small formations, you can decide as another action to dig in. That is, you will place a dug-in marker on units in a town, and they will be defended until the end of the round. You cannot activate them, and you cannot refuse battle if you're dug in. However, you ignore the first hit that is scored against you. The British player can bombard, this can use resources to attack coastal cities. There are a couple of other actions in general. But in general, the idea is that you're stretching your armies, moving supply lines, and by having long supply lines, you'll be able to move around, but then you're trying to concentrate war supplies in just a few neuralgic, few very important places to launch a major battle. Especially if you're the British, you want to annihilate those ungrateful colonials. If you are an American patriot, it is the other way around. You try to block and break enemy supply lines. You're trying to avoid large confrontations because it's going to be tough for you to win those battles. You're trying to catch the enemy unaware in open areas so you can launch those raids. And so it's very non-symmetrical gameplay. Continue like this, turn after turn, dealing with supplies, dealing with other type of historical events that have a lot of chromes. So, for example, the Americans do get reinforcements, but they need to be able to protect the areas where they will receive reinforcements. Reinforcements for the Americans are generated randomly by drawing chits from a cup. The British player probably want to occupy the areas that may generate reinforcements because that prevents that. The disbandment of the American army each turn has its own little procedure, which adds a lot of historical flavor and interesting challenges. In general, this is the general idea. Move around, move supplies, try to concentrate towards supplies to launch mighty attacks, try to survive if you are the American player. And you continue like this turn after turn until you reach a situation in which a winner will be decided. It is also possible that both sides actually will lose the game in case both sides fail to meet the victory conditions. This is a good game. This is a game that I like very much. It reminded me of two other games that I also like. One is A House Divided, for the level of complexity, the level of abstraction, I would say. And the other one is Washington's War, also for the level of complexity, abstraction, not very complex, fairly abstract, but still very thematic. And of course, also we have the similar topic with Washington's War. Washington's War is a card-driven game. And sometimes the abstract element almost looks like go on a war game as you're trying to surround your enemies. Here again, the emphasis is on logistics, but somehow a certain family resemblance that I could see made me think of those two games. However, Supply Lines of the American Revolution is very much its own game, and in fact it doesn't feel derivative. It feels pretty original. It feels like it has a very strong personality, and one that is quite engaging to interact with. There's a game that is full of challenges. It really is very easy to get into, meaning the rules are not complex. If you played actually an average Euro game, then you can play this game. This can be a perfect war game for new players that are just starting with wargaming. Can be an introductory war game. Actually, the similarities as it has with Euro games may even help a newer gamer make the transition. But as I said in the introduction, yet this does not feel like a Euro game with a theme pasted on. Rather, it feels like a war game that was able to borrow mechanics from Eurogaming and then integrate them in the war game engine in a way that feels very organic, absolutely smoothless. You really feel that it belongs there. You really feel that if you make a mistake and your armies get stuck in the middle of nowhere, or again, if you thought you had planned everything and then at the last minute because of miscalculation you are unable to complete the final march, or unable to complete the attack, you get into the battlefield with less resources than you expected. It feels right, it feels thematic, it feels historical, it feels like, again, The element, the abstract economic element, really is tied so well, is so close to the wargame element that you feel that it belongs there. It belongs there. When all of those terrible things that I mentioned earlier happen, it feels like that is a wrinkle, that is a nuance in your wargame experience, not a detour into another style of gaming. Well, that's quite an achievement. That's quite an impressive thing to do. Speaking about the mistakes, this is a pretty unforgiving, even brutal game. The rules say that several times. They want to warn you. It's very easy to get into in terms of complexity. It's extremely tough to play without making mistakes that the opponent can then exploit and just, you know, cause so much pain and misery on you that you become a shriveling lump of crying goo on the floor. Maybe not that extreme, but the possibility of making mistakes is huge. It is a system that, again, is very easy from the point of view of the rules, but can be very challenging from the point of view of intelligent, smart, effective implementation of those rules on the board. Expect to make mistakes, expect that maybe the first couple of times that you're playing it, you won't even get to the end of the game. You realize that you made those two mistakes, and at a certain point the tide has turned in such a way that it's better if you just stop there, you concede the game, you set it up, and you can play it again. Since the game is not too long, if you concede once or twice, you may be able to get 3 games in a single session. Actually, depending on how long your sessions are, you may be able to do that anyways. That is to say, before you play competitively, just get in the Zen attitude that you're just gonna play to learn how not to make horrendous mistakes, and then after that you'll just play and do the best and do what you can and make normal mistakes, forgivable mistakes. For this reason also, the game is very suitable for solitaire play. I mean, I would say almost precisely this element here almost encourages players to play that way. This way you're playing both sides at the best of your possibilities. There is still randomness, there is no hidden information, so it plays perfectly well as a solitaire game in which you are controlling both sides. And again, with the randomness or the reinforcements of the battlefields, plenty of elements to keep you interested, plenty of elements that will create unexpected situations and will give you interesting problems to analyze from either side of the conflict. And again, so it works well as a solitaire game. I'm almost suggesting, scratch the almost, I'm recommending that before you play with other humans, you play it solo to get a sense of really what are the things that you should do, and you will always underestimate, at least early on, how hard it is to get people where you want them to get, to bring, how hard it is to make sure that you concentrate resources for the battlefield, and that actually, and then that you create solid supply lines, or at least weak ones, but they will be there for at least as long as you need them to complete a major operation, and then maybe they will disappear for a while and then you reform them. So you need to be able to, again, to get a sense of what are the things that you should avoid, when is the time to push, when is the time to invest, and when is the time to be more conservative and to be more cautious. A lot of interesting elements to analyze. And I also like the fact that the game is so non-symmetrical. The forces of the two players, how they move, how they supply, how they behave, really encourage different styles of play, which is, if you're playing against a human, then by switching sides you will have completely different experiences. If you're playing the game solo, playing both sides, again, it's an interesting mental exercise to switch. Not just is the same situation seen from a slightly different angle Oh no, it's a completely different situation than I'm jumping into. If you are familiar with the practice of playing multiplayer war games in solo mode, then this will provide you with a lot of reasons to be interested in a lot of challenging situations. As the revolutionaries, you really need to use raids, mobility. You don't have much material means, and you need to maximize those. You need to be careful, you need to be delay, etc., etc. As the crown, you have massive power compared to the Americans. You have mobility, you have the sea, you have a lot of stuff. But these ungrateful colonials, these stubborn people, they just seem, if the American side plays well, they're just one step further than you would want them. They're just always slipping through your hands. They're just one box where they shouldn't be. I would say that, again, there are interesting challenges for both players. The map presents interesting challenges because you have the southern area of the map that has a fairly developed net with more mobility, and then you have these two bottlenecks that connect the central area of the board to Canada, and that's just a matter of pushing. It's a tug of war there. With, of course, the possibility of one side surrounding the other. It would take a while, it's a big effort, but at least the possibility exists, and that presents interesting situations because you want to prevent the opponent from enveloping from the other side of that double, or the two-lane organization of boxes in the middle of the board. Interesting map, interesting challenges for both players, and again, a very interesting implementation of the logistics and economic elements of warfare within what still is quintessentially a war game, and a very playable, very compelling representation of a war situation. Supply lines of the American Revolution, not the catchiest title out there, not the flashiest cover art that you will see, but there is a very strong, very original, very inventive, and very well designed wargaming here. One that I recommend to anybody interested in the topic, any introductory, any a new wargamer that is looking for introductory war games. This is something that you should consider, because definitely it is something that can be played by new wargamers, but even veteran wargamers, even grumpy grognards may find a lot of things to like in here, because the situation is challenging, the rules are simple, but gameplay is never trivial, always full of interesting and tough problems to analyze. Supply lines of the American Revolution, a very good war game.